Thank you so much for tuning in to Society Complex. This is your host, Von Lee. So let's go ahead and get into some breaking news. Hello, you are tuned into Society Complex, and this is your host, Von Lee. And today is Murder Monday. So, we're going to be getting into the case of Miss Eileen Warnos, aka the Damsel of Death, as they called her back in the 90s. So, this is a pretty old case, but I think this case is very complex. It's very interesting because there was a lot of mishandling of this case by this woman's lawyers, by the media, by the detectives in this case. I mean, I'm going to go over like the brief points, but if you're interested in true crime and you haven't heard this story, I would encourage you to go look it up and really get into it. It is really something, uh, I mean, it's a pretty crazy story. But we're going to go ahead and jump into it. So, as I said, Eileen Warnos, aka the Damsel of the damsel of death. I'm sorry. She actually was the first woman ever to fit the FBI profile of a serial killer. So she murdered seven men. I think she was convicted of only six because one of them that she so-called murdered, they actually did not find the body. But anyway, she was doing this from 1989 into 1990, and all of her victims, she shot them at point blank range. Okay. So initially, she claimed that all seven men had sexually assaulted her while she was working as a sex worker. But later on, she recanted those statements and cited robbery and the desire to leave no witnesses after, she robbed them. Now, this case, like I said, is really crazy because Eileen Warnos, her childhood was pretty much horrific. Her mother left her at a young age. She was a drug addict, and her father actually was in prison. I believe he was in prison for sexual assault, I'm pretty sure. And he also committed suicide. And then when she went to go live with her grandparents were actually, well, her grandfather was abusing her and her grandmother was a avid drinker. And I believe she died from that. But that, and she also got pregnant with one son, and the father of that son was actually one of her grandfather's friends. So she had, like I said, she has a history of extensive history of abuse and things like that throughout her childhood. There were many witnesses that were willing to come forward, telling, wanted to testify to this fact. Like about, I think it was about seven witnesses wanted to come through and testify for her on her behalf of this part. But like I said, her lawyers did not even call them to testify, even though they called and said that they would. They did not do that. Like I said, and I know a lot of people think that things like this do not affect someone, but they do. And they will affect you up until your adulthood, especially if you have not dealt with them and gotten any counseling, therapy, or anything like that. And she also was kicked out of her home from her grandparents at a very, very young age. I want to say it was around about like 10 or 12. So you can imagine, what you would do at 12 years old, living on the streets. So at 12, she became a sex worker or prostitute, whichever word you would like to use. So that is how she got started on that journey. But anyway, back into the case. So her first victim was Richard Mallory, and he was a shop owner in 1989. He was 51 years old, and he picked up a prostitute along Interstate 75, and his body was discovered several miles away from his abandoned car. And Mr. Mallory, had been shot in the chest several times. Now, this first one is the one that she initially claimed that he did sexually assault her. Now, during her case, the prosecutor said that they could not find any evidence to corroborate what she was saying and things like that. But it turns out in November 1992, actually, a reporter did find that Mr. Mallory did serve 10 years in prison in a different state for a violent sexual assault. So, like I said, miscarriage of a little bit of justice here because they didn't do their due diligence, and all they really had to do was look at the federal system, and they would have found this quite easily. Okay, but her next one was David Spears, age 43. He was a construction worker, and his nude body was found June 1st, 1990, and he had been shot in the torso 6 times. So, like I said, she she didn't do anything else to her victims. She shot all of them. She didn't like stab them or anything. She just pretty much shot them at point blank range. And I know in some of her interviews that she did while she was serving her, I think she served 6 life sentences before she was executed. But she said that they called her like a heinous killer. But in some of her interviews, if you go and watch them, she claims that she is not a heinous killer because she only shot them and she didn't do anything else, which I find that pretty interesting. But moving on, her third victim was Charles Kendeskin, and he was discovered a few days after David Spears. He was 40 years old, and he was a part-time rodeo worker. He was shot 9 times in the chest and the stomach. And then her victim number four was Troy Burris, and he was a 50-year-old salesman who was found August 4th, 1990, which was at least a week after he was reported missing. He was shot 2 times in the torso. Now, this next one, Peter Sims, they didn't actually convict her of this one, but I think she later admitted it. I'm pretty sure. But they didn't actually convict her of this one because they never found his body, but they said that he was in Central Florida and he was traveling to New Jersey in June of 1990. And they did find his car on July 4th, 1990. But like I said, his body was never found. But they do place two women near the car. Now, the two women that supposedly were near the car were Eileen Warnos and her then girlfriend, Tyree Moore. Now, this is also an interesting part of this case. Miss Tyree Moore was her girlfriend at the time. Now, she claims that she didn't know anything about this for a while until one day Lee or Eileen told her one day. Apparently, she says that she was lying to her about where she was getting the money and the cars for things. And I guess she claims that one night she just kind of told her. But after that, she still continued to be with her. But like I said, once the police and stuff got involved, they pretty much coerced Miss Tyree Moore into getting Eileen Warnos to admit what she had done because they made her make a phone call to her, basically telling her how much she loved her and how much she meant to her and so on and so forth. And they gave her the line of if she didn't admit what she did, then they were going to arrest Tyree Moore for all of it and so on and so forth. And so that's when Eileen, she told her on the phone, I did do these crimes, so on and so forth, because she, at that point, I'm guessing that she figured that the police were involved, the police were on the phone. And I think she said that in one of her interviews that she actually, after a few minutes of talking to her, she did know that the police were on the phone. And I'm not saying that, obviously, this is a tactic that the police use all the time, but like Tyree Moore, to me, I think she knew, honestly. I don't know how you could not know that. But and then she wanted to do several book deals, several movie deals, and things like that. And so did also there's 3 detectives that they wanted to do book deals and things like that, even though they claim that their pure intentions were to get the money and put it towards the victims' families. But they never did that. I don't believe they got any money from that. But they all did. 3 resign from their post during this trial. So that pretty much speaks for itself. But so moving right along, her next victim was Charles Humphrey. He was a retired Air Force major, police chief, and Florida child abuse investigator. He was found on September 12th, 1990. He was fully clothed, but he did suffer multiple gunshot wounds to the torso. So the next one is Walter Antonio. He was a 62-year-old male, and he was found partially clothed on November 19th, 1990. He had been shot 4 times in the back and the head, and his car was found about 5 days later. Now, like I said, this case is very, very interesting. So all the men that she did kill were white, older males picking up prostitutes. Um, so that's something to be said about that. Now, like I said, her first initial claim was that all the men had sexually assaulted her. But like I said, she later recanted that and only said that Richard Mallory did. And she did stick to that story of Richard Mallory. After in her court cases and her appeals, she stuck to that. And I know a lot of people don't believe her, but I do. I believe that the first one, Richard Mallory, I believe that that's what was his intentions. He did do it, and I think from then on, she just pretty much feared that every man was going to do that to her. And since it was done with him, and it was done all through her childhood. And so imagine that. And then, like I said, not getting any counseling or therapy for anything like that. I'm pretty sure her mental illness had just went to that. Because I did find out, like I said later, that she was suffering from some mental illness, even though they thought that she was still competent to stand trial. I don't believe she was competent to stand trial at all, at all. But back in the 90s, women were not taken very seriously about this kind of stuff, especially being a sex worker or a prostitute. Then they did not believe that a prostitute or sex worker could be assaulted, but that is not the case. I mean, that is just not the case. Yes, they do it. They do it for money, but that doesn't mean that this cannot happen to them. It doesn't mean that. Like I said, I believe at least the first one, Richard Mallard, I wholly believe that he did do it. And I think after that, she just went off the deep end because, like I said, that and she wasn't taking any medications for her mental illness and things like that. I think it just took over. It just took over her. It just took over her body. But anyway, so in the case, like I said, she had several lawyers, and then at first there is an automatic appeal. There's nothing anybody can do about that. But then her next appeal, when she got new lawyers, they even failed to bring in a bunch of witnesses that they called. They failed to do a lot of things in this case. And I'm not saying that she's not guilty, because she did plead guilty to I think 5 or 6 of these. But at first, her lawyer wanted to plead no contest because he said that he needed the media coverage to boost his own career. So pretty much people boosted the career off of this young lady's suffering and off of what she did. So I just don't feel like that was fair for them to do, because I mean, it was just complete. It's a crazy case. And there is actually a documentary, several documentaries out about this. So, like I said, if you're interested in true crime, I would certainly go and look those up and see about them. But we're going to take a short break, and we'll be right back, and we're going to continue to talk about Miss Eileen Warno. So stay tuned. Hello and welcome to Society Complex. This is your host, Von Lee, and you are tuned in to Murder Monday. So, for this Murder Monday, we're going to talk about Truman Capote. I don't know if you guys know, some of you might not, but he is the author of Breakfast at Tiffany's. And in 1959, he decided that he wanted to write another book, which is In Cold Blood. So this would be the first nonfiction novel. So he decided he wanted to write that. So when he heard about the Clutter murders, that is what he decided that he wanted to write about. I know some of you might not know about those, so I'm going to go ahead and give you a little bit of history, because this is more like a true crime history type of episode for our Murder Monday. But Herbert Clutter and his family were brutally murdered when two men broke into their farm one night. They were looking for money that they assumed was locked up in some kind of safe, but in fact, the safe never existed. So they were very enraged about that. And so that resulted in them wanting to leave no witnesses. Herbert's throat was cut and then he was blasted with a shotgun. His wife, Bonnie, and also, sadly, their 15-year-old son, Kenyon, and their 16-year-old daughter, Nancy, were also gunned down before the killers fled. So when Truman Capote heard about this, this is what he decided that he wanted to write the first nonfiction novel about. So him and his friend Harper Lee, they rode out to New York to check out the scene and get some more information in Holcomb County, Kansas. So on their way here, I don't know if you guys know a lot about Truman Capote, but apparently he was a very eccentric guy. So I'm pretty sure he probably stood out when he got to Kansas or this Holcomb County. Holcomb County. I'm sorry. So anyway, so when him and his friend got there, they met up with a special investigator, Alvin Dewey. So they charmed their way into this investigation. So Mr. Alvin Dewey, he kind of gave them some inside information. So, but the only thing that Mr. Capote thought he was missing was the trace of the killers. So about 6 weeks later, a former cellmate knew. He said that he knew of a plan to rob a safe, and he identified Perry Smith and Richard Dick Hickok as the Holcomb murderers. So they were arrested, they were tried, and they were sentenced to death by hanging because they eventually admitted their guilt. But he this whole thing kind of took like a sinister turn here when Capote, like I said, he felt like he needed more, and like I said, he felt like he needed to know about the trace of the killers. So what he decided that he wanted to do, he wanted to get the accounts of the murders first hand. So he went to visit Mr. Perry and Mr. Richard. But he clung to Mr. Perry more because Mr. Perry was interested in the arts, music, and stuff like that. So he began visiting him regularly over about, I think it was about 5 years. They kept in correspondence and stuff like that. Um, so he can get more for his book. And this is how he was writing his book because up until then it was incomplete. So he needed a completion to his book. Now, like I said, he got along with Mr. Perry. So when it came down to it, he didn't want him to be hung to death for his crime because he wanted more. And like I said, they had gotten close and things like that. So it was a kind of bitter twist and turn right there. But eventually they did get hung. And I think he stayed and they asked him to actually come to their execution. But Capote, he definitely couldn't he couldn't handle it because this whole thing was driving him pretty much mad. Literally, it was driving him mad. So it was really getting to him mentally. But anyway, Perry Smith and Richard Hickok eventually lost their final appeals because they did appeal a few times, but both men went to the gallows at April 14th, 1965. And like I said, Capote did attend reluctantly, but he still did. And he watched Richard Hickok get hung. But before Perry got executed, he actually ran out of the room. So finally, after this is said and done, I guess his anguish kind of relinquished a little bit. And he finally finished in cold blood after about 6 years. But look, we're going to stop right there and we're going to take a quick ad break. And please join me back for the rest of this story. Hello, and thank you for tuning in to Murder Monday on Society Complex. A 14-year-old Claire Miller is facing criminal homicide charges as an adult. A little after 1 a.m. on February 22nd, Claire Miller made a 911 phone call stating that she had killed her sister in their home.
When police arrived at the scene, Claire directed them to the sister's bedroom, where they saw Helen Miller, the 19-year-old sister, with a large knife and stab wound to the neck. Attempts to save her life were unsuccessful. The Lancaster County DA in Pennsylvania did approve the charges against Claire Miller after she was taken into custody on the same night. Out of St. Paul, Minnesota, an 11-year-old boy was fatally wounded along with his sister and mother. Before he passed away, he identified the alleged killer as his mother's ex-boyfriend, 26-year-old Keith Jones. Jones is facing 3 counts of second-degree murder for the murder of DeSandria Wallace and her 14-year-old daughter, LaPortia, and the 11-year-old boy, Jacoby, according to the authorities. Allegedly, Jones confessed to the crimes, stating he wanted to save them, according to a criminal complaint obtained by Oxygen.com. Police were called to the scene around 3 p.m. Saturday, February 20th, after a 911 phone call saying there are 3 people in the house and there is blood everywhere. According to the complaint, Jones stated, quote, "Hell yeah, I saved them. They can go up there and be holy," end quote. Also, he allegedly told authorities that he was trying to keep the mother, DeSandria, from, quote, killing her own kids, end quote. She was playing mind games and corrupting the kids, according to Jones. Jones also stated he was not a monster and he kissed them all. Please stay tuned. We'll be right back with more Murder Monday headlines. Hello, and thank you for tuning into Society Complex. This is your host, Von Lee, and you are tuned in to Murder Monday. We are beginning our new series on infamous female serial killers. So today we are going to talk about a American female serial killer. Her name is Dorothea Puente, and she was born in a small community in Redlands, California in 1929. She was 10 when her parents passed away, and then she was sent to an orphanage. So this is just a little bit of her backstory before we get into the real juicy stuff. At 16, she was married to a military man that had 2 kids. Now, one she sent to live in Sacramento, and then the other one she put up for adoption. According to court records, both of her parents were very abusive. I think her father died from tuberculosis, and I think he was in some kind of motorcycle accident. Both of her parents were abusive to her. Anyway, moving on. So that was her first marriage at 16. But I think she was married a total of about 4 times. Her criminal activity started well early into her 20s after she was caught forging checks, just like her mom. Her mom forged some checks also, but she was caught forging checks, and then she went to jail for about 6 months with that jail sentence. And then she also went to prison for fraud. And then she went from fraud to prostitution. In the 1960s, she was arrested because she was running a brothel, and she spent about 90 days in jail because of that. It violated her parole, so to speak, because when we get ready to talk about a little bit more of it, you'll see why. But so her last name, Puente, comes from her second marriage to a much younger guy named Roberto in 1966. So after this, you would think that she would get her life straight and back together. You thought that's what she was doing because she started caring for elderly people as a nurse's assistant. You know, where you go and you take care of the elderly inside of their private homes and stuff like that. So once she got doing that, then she opened up a boarding house for like elderly people, homeless people, disabled people, things like that. Basically, people that collect social security checks. She has 3 failed marriages later, and Puente was finally in charge of her own place, which is the boarding house. It was a 2-story and it had 16 Victorian style rooms, and it was located on F Street. So that was like a little bit down from Sacramento. So what she would do, she would only board some of the most difficult people. So it's like men and women with mental health problems or drug addictions. So she had a reputation among the social workers for accepting the harder cases. So the tenants range from the ages of 52 to 80, and they often needed to have their social security checks cashed for them. So one day, she took on this task, and obviously she was happy to do it. But little did they know what she was up to. And so she was getting tranquilizer prescriptions from psychotherapists, which she was secretly administering to her tenants before killing them. But then she continued to cash their checks after they were already gone. So basically, it's like she let them move in. It's a little, a little late. Did they, for them to find out that she was cashing them. I think some of them actually did find out. But what she did after that. But yeah, so basically this is what her little racket was. Get them, get their money, they're gone. So none of her victims, they didn't have any close friends or family anyway, so she figured, disappearance wouldn't cause anybody to notice. She said one of her victims remained unidentified for about 3 years after they had found the bodies. So her killing spree ended in 1988 after a social worker approached her about one of her boarders, Alberto Montoya, and she said basically he was mysteriously gone missing. And so she conducted a investigation. So the social worker discovered that the boarding house was unlicensed, and then she reported Montoya missing to the authorities. So in an effort to cover up her tracks, Dorothea told the police that Montoya had taken a vacation, but obviously they're not going to believe that, so they thought some things were funny. So I guess they went to the house and they basically saw something really strange. They saw some of the ground at the property looked a little peculiar. So obviously that's going to raise a few questions with them. But we are going to take a quick break and we will be right back. Okay, we are back and we are doing Murder Monday, and right now we are talking about Dorothea Puente. She is our first female serial killer. So we were talking about how she had a boarding house, or she was running an unlicensed boarding house. So her boarding house has a little bit of mixed reviews. Some of her tenants say she was nice. Some of them say she was stingy. She complained when they refused to give the money and things like that. But others, like I said, others praised her for her small acts of kindness with the handmade meals and things like that. So, like I said, according to police, her motive for killing the tenants though was financial. So they estimated she got an ill-gotten income totaling more than $5,000 per month, and this is per month. Okay, So they're saying that she, shortly after Pointe began renting out space in the home, and the home is at 1426 F Street. Um, this is when she started. So, April 1982, 61-year-old friend and business partner Ruth Monroe began living with Dorothea in her upstairs apartment. But she soon died from an overdose of codeine and Tylenol. Puente told the police that the woman was very depressed because her husband was terminally ill. So they believed her and they let it go, and they judged it as a suicide. And then a few weeks later, the police were back and they were looking for a 74-year-old person that lived there, Malcolm McKenzie. And he is one of the 4 elderly people Puente was accused of drugging. So he accused her of drugging and stealing from him. So she was convicted of 3 charges of theft on August 18th, 1982, and she was sentenced to 5 years in jail. And this is where she started corresponding with a 77-year-old retired person living in Oregon, and his name is Everson Gilmouth. So, they were pen pals. They developed a little friendship, things like that. And she was released in 1985 after serving just her 3 years of her 5-year sentence. So Everson came and picked her up. So, they've developed a little relationship. They became a little couple. And they were making little wedding plans and things like that. And then they opened up a joint bank account and paid $600 a month rent for the upstairs apartment at the 1426 F Street in Sacramento. So, in November 1985, Dorothea hired a handyman, Ishmael Flores, to do some woodwork, paneling, lay some concrete, odds and ends around the house. It's about, I think she paid him about $800, he said. And then Puente gave him a red 1980 Ford pickup that was in good condition, which she had stated belonged to her boyfriend in Los Angeles, who no longer needed it, because the same red pickup was the one that Everson Gilmouth had picked her up with when she got out of prison. But she stated that he would no longer need it, so she gave it to him. And then she asked him to build a box 6 feet by 3 feet by 2 feet, and she said it was to store books and other items in this. So then she asked him to transport and fill the nail shut box to a storage depot. So he helped her move it. And then on the way here, she told him to stop, at the Garden Highway in Sutter County and dump the box on the riverbank in an unofficial house dumping site. Puente told him that the contents of the box, it was just junk, so he wasn't the wiser at this. So on January 1st, 1986, a fisherman spotted that very box. He was about 3 feet from the bank of the river. And so he told police. So they came out and they investigated, and they found a badly decomposed and unidentifiable body of an elderly man. So Puente continued to collect Everson Gilmouth's pension. So remember, this is the guy that picked her up from prison that she began being a pen pal with. And she wrote letters to his family explaining the reason why he hasn't contacted them, because he was ill, etc., etc. Basically lying, so she can still collect his pension checks. So she maintained a room and board business, or boarding house, as people call it. She took in about 40 new tenants, but Gilmouth's body remained unidentified for about 3 years. So she still continued to accept elderly and mentally ill tenants. She was popular around the area with the social workers, as she took on the more tough cases, I guess they would say, including drug addicts and abusive tenants. Now, she collected monthly for their rent, but she would get their checks sent to her because they would need help cashing them. So that's what she was doing. She was going and cashing the checks. So, but before they even saw it, and she paid them stipends, and then she pocketed the rest for quote unquote expenses. So during this whole time, parole agents went and visited Puente, who had been ordered to stay away from the elderly and refrain from handling government checks. Obviously, from her criminal history, that was a no-go for her parole. At a minimum of 15 times at the residence, and they reported no violations were ever noted. So suspicion was first aroused when one of the neighbors noticed that odd activities of a homeless guy, alcoholic guy. They called him Chief. So Puente said that she kind of adopted him as, her personal handyman. So he's the one he dug the basement and then carted soil and rubbish away in a wheelbarrow. And then the basement floor was covered with a concrete slab. And then later on, Chief, he took down a garage in the backyard and he installed also a fresh concrete slab there as well. But soon after that, Chief just kind of disappeared. And so I guess that is what caused the neighbors to look around after that. I mean, obviously that would be suspicious. You know what I'm saying? So, okay. So a little bit more about her. I know we went over it a little bit, but get a little more in depth about her background. So she was born on January 9th, 1929. She was born in San Bernardino, California. Like I said, her mother and father were two alcoholics. Her father was a cotton picker, but both of her parents did abuse her, and she had to scavenge for food and things like that. Her father died when she was 4. When she was 6, her mother died. Like I said, she was sent to the orphanage after that until relatives came from Fresno and got her. So, I told you she was married at 16. That's her first husband, but it didn't last very long. He died 2 years later of a heart attack. So this is what I was talking about earlier with the crime history. So after that, it's to keep money, she tried forging checks. So she was caught, and then she went to jail for a year. And then she was, that's when she went to jail, was released after 6 months. And then after that was when she got pregnant with a girl from some guy she didn't know really that well, and so she gave that one up for adoption. And so that's when she married Axel Johnson, and that was also a long, violent marriage. So I hope you guys are really enjoying. You're just as excited as I am about continuing on our female serial killer series. I know I am. I'm very, very excited about it. Yeah, this one's pretty interesting, but I have a lot more interesting ones that are coming up. So make sure you guys stay tuned about that. You can let me know what you think about this case so far. You can tweet me at Society Complex 1 on Twitter. You can also find me on Facebook at Society Complex. You can also shoot me an email at societycomplex10@gmail.com. And you can also find me on Instagram at society_complex. Okay, so just let me know what you guys think about this one and the upcoming ones that we are going to be discussing. So, okay, so arrest and imprisonment of Dorothea Puente. Okay, so on November 11, 1988, police inquired about the missing tenant, Alvaro Montoya, as we were just talking about. He was a developmentally disabled schizophrenic whose social worker had actually reported him missing. So after noticing the soil on the property was was disturbed and had been uncovered. The police went there because the social worker reported them missing. She saw it. They came. They looked. So then they uncovered the body of tenant Luana Carpenter, 78. Then they also discovered 7 more bodies on the property. So she was actually charged with 9 murders. She was convicted of 3 and sentenced to 2 life terms. Now I believe that they confirmed these 9 murders, but they also think that she did about a total of about 25 murders that she was not charged for. So during the initial investigation, Puente wasn't immediately a suspect. Sorry. So she was allowed to leave the property. So she asked one of the officers, could she go across the street to a little hotel and buy a cup of coffee? But instead, after that buying of the coffee, she fled and she went to Los Angeles, where you guessed it, she befriended another elderly person that she met. So she met this guy in a bar. However, when she met this guy, the guy actually recognized her. So she was trying to get him, basically saying that she wanted to move in with him and so on and so forth. But he did recognize her from the television, and then he contacted a television station, and the television station contacted the authorities. So her trial was in California. They did like a couple of changes of venues, saying she wasn't gonna get a fair trial where she was at. She had 2 attorneys. Her trial started on October 1992 and it ended about a year later. So the prosecutor, John O'Mary, he called over 130 witnesses. He argued to the jury that she used the sleeping pills to put in the tenant's drink to make them go to sleep, and then she would suffocate them, and then she would hire convicts to dig the holes in her yard to put them in. It's really crazy. Really, really crazy. And this is a well thought out plan this lady did. She was definitely doing a racket here. But so that is what they were saying. And then in his closing arguments, he showed pictures of commonly used in psychology that can be viewed in different ways, saying keep in mind that they're not always as they seem, because she was actually like a really older lady herself. So it's like an older lady killing older people. So she looked like a sweet old granny, So obviously looks can be deceiving because she was not just a sweet old granny. So anyway, the jury deliberated for about over a month, and they found her guilty of 3 murders. However, they could not agree on some of the other ones. So the penalty phase, the prosecution had highlighted by her prior convictions introduced by Omar, which was the prosecutor. So the defense called several witnesses that showed Puente was generous and caring and so on and so forth. So, and one of her witnesses was her long-lost daughter. So they testified how Puente had helped them in their youth and guided them to successful careers and so on and so forth. So some of these mental health experts that testified on Puente's abusive upbringing and how it motivated her to help the less fortunate. But at the same time, they agree she had an evil side brought on by the stress of caring for her own down and out tenants. But Omar was not having it. He didn't believe any of this. He thought she was just the coldest person that there was, basically. So it's a very long trial. So the conviction, after several days of deliberations, the jury was deadlocked to a 7-5 for life. So the judge, he declared a mistrial when the jury said further deliberations would not change their minds or anything like that. So under the law, Puente received life without the possibility of parole. She was incarcerated at the Central California Women's Facility. And then for the rest of her life, she did maintain her innocence, and she insists that all her tenants had died of natural causes. which is what also her lawyer had insisted on, that they died of natural causes. She just never, basically, she never called anybody, no ambulance or anything like that to pick them up. Then she just buried them. So she's saying she didn't kill them, but they died in her house, and she just basically buried them in the backyard. But still kept cashing her checks. Just saying. But she died on March 27th, 2011, at 82 of natural causes. So thank you guys so much for listening to our first episode on our Murder Monday series, and I will see you next Monday. Hello, and thank you for tuning in to Society Complex. This is your host, Von Lee, and I hope you're staying safe, wearing your mask in this COVID pandemic. And if you choose to get your vaccine, I hope you're doing that as well. So, today is Monday, so you know what that means. It is Murder Monday. And if you have been joining me lately, or you're just tuning in, we are doing a series on female serial killers right now. So, without further ado, we're going to go ahead and jump right into our first female serial killer. And the first one is Jane Toppin. So that's Jane Toppin. She was actually born Honora Kelly. She was an American serial killer, and she has earned the nickname Jolly Jane. After her arrest in 1901, she confessed to about 31 murders, but only 12 were confirmed, but she did confess to 31. She was quoted saying that her ambition was to have killed more people, helpless people, than any other man or woman who ever lived. So a little bit about Jane Toppin's early life. Like I said, she was born with the name Honora Kelly on March 31st, 1854. She is the daughter of Irish immigrants. Her mother, Bridget Kelly, died of tuberculosis when she was very young. Her father, Peter Kelly, was well known as a abusive alcoholic and very eccentric, which earned him the name Kelly the Crack. And crack as in, you guessed it, crack pipe. In later years after that, her father became the source of local rumors concerning his supposed sanity or insanity. The most popular one being that he pretty much went mad. He was a tailor, and he apparently sewed his own eyelids closed. So in 1860, a few years after his wife had died, he dropped his two youngest children off. He had 3 daughters, so he dropped his 2 youngest children off, and that is 8-year-old Delia Josephine and 6-year-old Honora, who we're talking about now. So he dropped them off at BFA, which is Boston Female Asylum, which is a orphanage for female children, or indentured female children. So he never saw them again after that. Now, supposedly there's no records that exist of Delia and Nora's their experiences during their time in the asylum. But it's reported that Delia became a prostitute, while her older sister Nellie, which is the oldest one, she was never committed to the orphanage, but she was committed to a insane asylum. So I'm guessing you can see a pattern here with the Kelly family. So in November 1862, about 2 years after their father had left them at the orphanage, Honora Kelly, or Jane Toppin, was placed as an indentured servant in a home with a lady by the name of Miss Ann Toppin of Massachusetts. So they never formally adopted her, but she did take on their surname, which was Toppin. So, but the Toppins already had a daughter, and her name was Elizabeth, whom Honora was on good terms with. Okay, so now let's get into the realness here. Okay, so in 1885, Jane began to be a training to become a nurse at Cambridge Hospital. She was described as brilliant but terrible, but she was brilliant, and she was very well liked. She was bright, she was friendly, which is why she got the nickname Jolly Jane. So once she got close to her patients, she'd pick her favorite ones, normally elderly and very sick. So during her residency here, Topping used her patients as pretty much like guinea pigs for her experiments with morphine and a few other drugs. She altered their prescribed dosages so that she could see what it would do to their nervous systems. However, she spent a considerable amount of time alone with the patients, making up fake charts and medicating them to drift in and out of consciousness, and even getting them into bed with them. So she was recommended for a prestigious Massachusetts General Hospital in 1889, and she claimed several more victims before being fired the following year. She briefly returned to Cambridge, but was soon dismissed for administering opiates recklessly, which is obviously what she was doing. But she began a career as a private nurse, and she flourished despite complaints of petty theft. Toppin began poisoning her little poisoning spree here in about 1895 by killing her landlord, Israel Dunham, and also his wife. And then in 1899, she killed her foster sister Elizabeth with a dose of strychnine. And then in 1901, she moved in with an elderly man, Alden Davis, and his family. She took care of him after his wife's death, Maddie, who Toppin also murdered. And then within weeks, she killed the husband, Mr. Davis, and his sister Edna, and two of his daughters, Minnie and Geneva. So she killed this entire family. But the surviving members of the Davis family, they did order a toxicology exam on the husband and the youngest daughter, Minnie, and the report found that she had been poisoned. And the local authorities, obviously they assigned police to put a detail on Toppin, to watch her, etc., etc. On October 29th, 1901, she was arrested for murder. But by 1902, she had confessed to 31 murders. So soon after the trial, one of William Randolph Hearst's newspapers, this is the New York Journal, printed, and it portrayed her confession to her lawyer, claiming that she had killed more than 31 people. Because in the first one, she actually got tried. She was found not guilty. Then after that, she told her lawyer that she did murder these people, and it was more than 31 people. And so she wanted the jury to find her sane so she could eventually have a chance to be released. But instead, Toppin insisted upon her own sanity in court, which obviously totally not sane. The entire family, had obviously a mental history problem here. But anyway, so claiming that she could not be insane if she knew what she was doing, and she knew that it was wrong. But nonetheless, they declared her insane and committed on June 23rd. So she was found not guilty by reason of insanity, and she was committed for life to a insane hospital. But these are her verified victims here. So we already talked about the first one, Israel Dunham, the patient, right? Then Lovely Dunham, also patient. Elizabeth Brigham, which was her foster sister from the people that she was with during her indentured servitude. And then Mary McNear, patient. Flores Calkins, which is was the housekeeper of Elizabeth. So, because when she was staying with them after the parents had died, she still chose to stay with the daughter and grew up with the family, etc., etc. But she obviously killed her. Then she killed the housekeeper because she wanted the housekeeper's job. All right, and then the next one is William Ingram, patient. Sarah Connor's patient and supposedly her friend. Maddie Davis, I'll tell you about that one, which is the wife of Alden Davis. Geneva Gordon, which is Annie, which is the daughter of Alden and Maddie. Then Alden Davis, she killed, and then Minnie Gibbs, which is the daughter of Alden and Maddie, and then Edna Bannister, which is the sister-in-law of Elizabeth. So, moving right along here. So she has gotten the name of Angel of Death. She said it was reported that she fondled her victim as they died and attempted to see their inner workings of their soul through their eyes. This is what she said. And she said that she has got plenty of sexual thrill from patients being near death, coming back to life, and then dying again. Because sometimes she would not poison them to kill them. She would poison them to make them sick so she could take care of them and then kill them. So that's where you see the life and then dying again. She administered a mixture of drugs to patients, so she chose her victims. She'd lay with them and hold them close as they died, which is why she got is considered an angel of death, which is a type of serial killer who takes on a caregiver role and attacks vulnerable and dependent people, basically the elderly or sick, like the last one we talked about in our previous Murder Monday. But as though, even though she also murdered for seemingly more personal reasons, like the case of the Davis family, most of it they saw as jealousy, which is the case of her murdered foster sister Elizabeth, who she later describes her motivation as a paralysis of thought and reason and a strong urge to poison. So take that how you will. She used poison for more than just murder, though. She reportedly was poisoning a housekeeper just enough so that she would appear drunk in order to steal her job and kill the family, which she did. And she even poisoned herself a couple of times to invoke sympathy for the men, from men that she was dating. Okay, so that is it right this very second. We're going to take a short break and then we're going to go into our next female serial killer. Okay, which I was actually a professional wrestler. Okay, so stay tuned. We will be right back. Alright, and we are back for our Murder Mondays. Thank you so much for staying tuned. So, our next female serial killer that we have up is Miss Wano Barraza. She was born December 27th in 1957. She is a Mexican serial killer and a former professional wrestler. She is dubbed the Old Lady Killer. She was sentenced to 759 years in prison for killing between 42 and 49 elderly women, but only 11 were confirmed. So, a little bit about her early life. She was born in a rural area of North Mexico City. Barraza's mother was an alcoholic who reportedly sold her to a man in exchange for 3 beers. He was with her, she was with him for about 5 years until her uncles found her. And the whole time that was going on, her mother was actually lying to her family, saying that the girl had went there willingly with him, which is obviously not true. But in his care, he repeatedly sexually assaulted her, and she became pregnant with a son, and she had actually I believe it was 4 kids. And one of them died. I think in a result it was like a mugging. I believe it was. But anyway, so yeah. Obviously her childhood was not that great, but before that, her mother had sent her off to with this guy, traded her for beer money. She Her mother was already abusing her anyway. So obviously, as you can see, her childhood not so great, which is the reason she claimed that she started the killing in the first place was due to what her mother had did to her. So it's like a vendetta kind of thing, like, getting back at older women because of what her mother her mother did. So anyway, so like I said, her mother exchanged her for the 3 beers. She became pregnant with a son. She had 4 children in total. Her eldest son died from injuries, yes, sustained by mugging. But prior to her arrest, Barraza was a wrestler under the ring name the Lady of Silence. So that is also another one of her names, the Lady of Silence, in addition to the old lady killer. She had a strong interest in becoming a wrestler, a Mexican masked wrestler, that is. So, all of Raza's victims were women aged at least 60 or over who lived alone. She usually would bludgeon them or strangle them before robbing them. So, basically, she was robbing them and then killing them with things inside of their home. So the chief prosecutor in Mexico City, initially he profiled the killer and said it's a person that was a brilliant mind, clever, careful. They also suggested that the killer probably struck after gaining the trust of the intended victims, which was true because she was impersonating a government official. I believe it was like for Social Security, welfare, things like that, trying to sign them up for welfare programs. But the search for her was very, very complicated. It was very conflicting evidence. At one point, the police thought there were 2 killers that might be involved. And then I know at least 3 of the victims, they owned a print of a 18th century painting by a French artist, Jean Baptiste, and the painting was a boy in a red waistcoat. So they obviously, they were thinking that she was robbing them for that. Which she was doing that, but it had nothing to do with the paintings. So after this, the authorities believed that she was a sociopath who had felt no remorse for her victims or obviously anyone else. But Barraza, she had associated her elderly victims, like I said before, with her mother, and she believed she was helping society by getting rid of them so they wouldn't do what her mother did to her. So she would gain their trust of her victims, and like I said, she posed as a government official in social welfare. And because of this is why she is placed in the caregiving category of female killers. So the trauma that she faced in her childhood abuse was a factor in her murders. So the police, though, in Mexico City, they were heavily criticized in the media for dismissing evidence about the serial killer and things like that. In the late summer of 2005, after the investigation began to get a little motion into it, they were talking about transvestite prostitutes and things like that. It was just getting pretty crazy in the media and things. It just, I don't know what they were doing. crazy things. But in November 2005, the authorities began reporting the witness statements to the effect that the killer wore women's clothing, right? So they obviously thought it was a man, women clothing to gain access to the apartment. In one case, they reported a large woman in a red blouse was seen leaving the home of one of the murdered women. So basically, they thought that's why the whole transvestite thing came about. They thought it was a man dressed in women's clothing. So about 2 months later, the police began checking the fingerprints of the bodies that they had in the city morgue because they assumed that the person had committed suicide for some odd reason. I'm not sure why they thought that. But anyway, so the major breakthrough of this case, though, came on January 25th, 2006, when a suspect was arrested fleeing the home of one of the latest victims, which was Ana Maria de los Reyes Alfaro, who lived in a borough of Mexico City. She was 82 and she had been strangled with a stethoscope. But to the surprise of the authorities, who had supposed that the killer was a male, the suspect that they detained was Miss Barrares. She was 48 at that time, and like I said, she was a female wrestler known as the Silent Lady. So, the witnesses at the previous murder scenes had described a masculine-looking woman, and police previously looked for a transvestite, although they later admitted that the former wrestler did resemble the composite images that they had drawn of the suspect. Barrares closely resembled a model of the female features that were showed on the sketches: close cropped hair dyed blonde, a facial mole, and also when she was picked up at this murder scene, she was carrying a stethoscope, pension forms, and also a card identifying her as a social worker when she was detained. So she had all those things when she was arrested. The Mexico City prosecutors, they found fingerprint evidence that linked Barrares to at least 10 murders, but they suspected her of about 40 murders, and so they did attribute those to her also. She did confess to murdering Alfara, which was the one she got caught at, and 3 other women, but she denied involvement in all the other killings. She told the reporters that she went to her last victim's house to search for laundry work. Barrares was tried in the spring of 2008, and the prosecutors alleged that she had been responsible for as many as 40 deaths, maybe more, but they did about 40. She admitted to one murder, and that was the last one that she did, and she told police that her murder was a lingering resentment regarding her own mother's treatment of her. On March 31st, she was found guilty on 16 charges of murder and aggravated burglary, and it also included 11 separate counts of murder. And she was sentenced to 759 years in jail. So that's crazy, crazy, crazy. She killed all these elderly people based off the resentment of her mother. This is a crazy story. Please let me know what you think about this one and all the other ones, or if you have any questions, comments, concerns about anything, or if you want me to do a special Murder Monday on something or someone, please let me know. You can follow me on Twitter at Society Complex 1. You can also find me on Facebook at Society Complex. You may also hunt me down on Instagram at Society_Complex, and you are also welcome to send me an email at societycomplex10@gmail.com. Thank you so much for listening. You guys stay safe out there, and I'll see you next time. Hello, and thank you for tuning into Society Complex. This is your host, Von Lee, and welcome to True Crime Chronicles, formerly known as Murder Monday. Thank you guys so much for staying tuned in here at Society Complex. I hope everybody's being safe, wearing your mask, washing your hands, whatever it is you got to do to keep yourself and your family safe. So, if you have been joining me on Mondays, you know that we have been doing a series on female serial killers. Okay, so we got a couple more episodes. So, this right here is one. So, it is about Nanny Doss, but she was born as Nancy Hazel. She's known as the Giggling Granny, the Lonely Hearts Killer, the Black Widow, or Lady Bluebeard. But if you want to go by the newspapers, she was called a self-made widow, and here is why. She is responsible for the deaths of 11 people. So, 5 husbands, 2 children, her sister, her mother, 2 grandsons, and a mother-in-law. So, as you can see, that is why she's called the self-made widow. But a little bit about her early life. Nanny was born November 4th, 1905 in Alabama to Nancy Hazel and James F. Hazel. She was one of 5 children. She had 1 brother and three sisters. Nanny and her mother both hated James, which is her father, her mother's husband. They said he was very controlling father and husband. He forced the kids to work on the family farm instead of going to school, which obviously, is going to lead to poor academic performance. When she was 7, she had an accident on a train when she was going to visit some family. She hit her head on a metal bar in the seat in front of her when the train had suddenly stopped. So for years after that, she suffered from really bad headaches and migraines, blackouts, depression. And obviously she blamed that on the accident. And she also blamed that for her mental instability. So she blamed the accident for her mental instability. So during her childhood, her favorite hobby was to read. So she liked to read her mother's romance novels. And so, she would dream about having her own romantic future, her own husband, and things like that. And later on, there was a newspaper column that she also really loved to read, and the column was called Lonely Hearts. So Nanny's father was James, right? So he, again, controlling man, he didn't let the girls wear any makeup, any attractive clothes, or anything like that, because he believed that it would prevent them from being assaulted by men. And he also forbade them to go to any dances or any social events. So you can imagine how that childhood was. Pretty daggone boring. Especially, girls. I mean, 4 girls, they couldn't do anything. So, but when she was 16, Nanny was married to Charlie Braggs. He was her co-worker at a linen factory. So her father actually did approve of this marriage, even though they had only known each other for about 4 months of dating. He was the only son, Charlie was the only son of a single mother who insisted on living with them even after Nanny and Charlie got married. So can you imagine how that goes? But he was also only 16 anyway. So she was only 16. So, but anyway, so the mother, like I said, she wanted to stay with them even after they had gotten married. So his mother took up all his time and attention and everything, and Nanny got nothing, basically. She got no time and attention from her husband because her mother was still there, or his mother was still there, and took up all his time, which I'm guessing she did this on purpose. They had 4 daughters in between 1923 and 1927. Nanny became stressed out. She started drinking, casually smoking, and it slowly but quickly became a very bad addiction. So she, was drinking and things like that. And they both were they suspected each other of cheating, which they both were correct. They both actually were cheating. She was cheating, he was cheating. And then it said that her husband, her first husband here, Braggs, he went out and he left for days and days and days at a time. And then in 1927, the couple actually lost their two middle girls from a suspected food poisoning. So, suspected food poisoning. That's what they said at first. As I'm pretty sure as you probably could guess. But after that, the husband came back, Charlie, and he took the first daughter, Melvina, and he took off. So he fled with that one, and then he left the newborn baby, Florine, behind with Nanny. So Bragg's mother died not much after that, and then she started working in a cotton mill to support the younger daughter and herself, which was a newborn. So, but then in the summer of 1928, the husband comes back, accompanied by another woman that has her own child. So obviously they get a divorce, and now he did finally leave the two girls there. But he says that he left because he was frightened of her. That's what he said. He said that's why he left. He was frightened of Nanny. So her second marriage to her second husband was Robert Franklin Harrelson. They met and married in 1929, so not soon after this, 2 years later almost. They lived in Jacksonville with Melvina and Florine, which was the two girls. And after a few months, she discovered that he was an alcoholic and had a criminal record for assault. And despite this, they were still married for 16 years. Melvina gave birth, which is the younger daughter, gave birth to Robert Lee Haynes in 1943. And then she had another baby about 2 years later, but it died soon after. So, exhausted and groggy, Melvina thought she saw her visiting mother stick a hat pin into the baby's head. When she asked her husband and sister for clarification, they said that Nanny had told them the baby was dead, and they noticed that she was holding a pin. And the doctors, however, they couldn't give a positive explanation. So, in other words, she killed her grandchild. On top of her already daughter. Just saying. But so the grieving parents, they drifted apart. Obviously, Melvina started dating a soldier, and her mom, Nanny, did not like him at all. She did not like this man at all. So while she was visiting her father after a nasty fight with her mother, her son Robert died mysteriously. So this is her other grandchild has also died mysteriously under Nanny's care on July 7th, 1945. The death was diagnosed as asphyxia from unknown causes. And then 2 months after that, Nanny collected the $500 life insurance she had taken out on Robert, which was the son of her daughter. So then, after this, she was married to her second husband, which was Robert Franklin Harrelson. So he was in the World War II. Now, he liked to drink corn whiskey, and like I told you, even though despite the alcohol and the criminal record for assault, she still stayed married to him for 16 years. But one day, while she was doing her, garden, she found his corn whiskey jar buried in between her roses. So one night, the night before that, though, he was heavily drinking after he came back from the parties, and he sexually assaulted Nanny. So the next day, when she discovers the corn whiskey jar buried, with her roses and everything, that was the last straw for her. That was it. She was done after 16 years. So what she did, she topped his drink off with rat poison, and as a result, he died later that evening. So moving right along to her third husband, Arlie Lanning. Through one of her favorite columns, Lonely Hearts column, which is why she got the name Lonely Hearts Killer. She was traveling to Lexington, North Carolina, and she married him 3 days later. Like her second husband, he also was an alcoholic womanizer. However, in this marriage, it was Nanny who she often disappeared for months and months and months at a time. But when she was home, she played a great wife. And then when he died of what was said to be heart failure, the town people, they supported her at the funeral, thinking that nothing was wrong. So they just kind of moved on. But soon after that, the couple's house had been left to her husband's sister. It burned down, and their insurance money went to Nanny. So I'm pretty sure you can imagine what went on there. She got the money. So this is twice that she got money. Once for killing her grandchild, well, 2 of them, and then this one when her husband suspiciously died, and then also suspiciously after that, the house that was left to his sister was also burned down, and she got the money, which obviously she quickly banked on that. And after Lanny's mother died in her sleep, and then Nanny left North Carolina and ended up at her sister's Dovey's house, and Dovey was bedridden, and soon after Nanny's arrival, she was also dead. So everywhere this lady goes, somebody is dead, more than one. Oh my God. I thought the story was really, really interesting when I read about it, because it's literally everywhere she goes, someone dies. Everywhere she goes, someone dies. But look, we're going to take a quick break. So stay with me, stay tuned. We'll be right back, and we're going to finish up on this True Crime Chronicles on Monday. All right. Hello, and thank you for tuning into Society Complex with your host, Von Lee. And we are back for True Crime Chronicles here on this Monday. And if you've been following me on social media, you know that we have a new series starting today on this Monday. And if you have not followed me on social media, please do so. You can tweet me on Twitter at Society Complex 1. You can find me on Facebook at Society Complex, and you can also find me on Instagram at Society_Complex, or you are definitely welcome to shoot me an email at societycomplex10@gmail.com. And like I said, you follow me on social media, you know that we are starting a new series. Our last series was infamous female serial killers, and that was a lot of fun. So this one is about organized crime. So we're going to start pretty much at the beginning here of what actually is organized crime, defined by the FBI and so on and so forth. And then after that, then we're going to jump into some cases after we get a little bit of education first, okay? So organized crime is a category of transnational, national, or local groupings of highly centralized enterprise ran by criminals to do illegal activity. Now, most of them, as we know, are for profit, but there are some criminal organizations, such as what we've known as terrorist groups, that are more politically motivated than they are about money. So criminal organizations or gangs, they have many different words, but it's pretty much, the same. That's why it's called organized crime, obviously. But you may hear some referred to as the mafia, mob, ring, or a syndicate. And then they have networks and subcultures of community. It's like a community of criminals, and you may hear this referred to as the underworld. Okay, so according to some sociologists, to define a mafia is a type of organized crime group that specializes in the supply of extra legal protection. So they're kind of like the opposite of law enforcement, but the same as law enforcement, I guess. So it's like a law enforcement for criminals is basically what they're saying. So you may hear these terms, like I said, the mafia. So you may think as far back to pretty much the beginning with the Sicilian mafia, which totally predates lots of other groups, and is generally an economic study when they have done about organized crime groups. So, like I said, you hear about the Sicilian Mafia. Then you also hear about the Russian Mafia, Chinese Triads, Hong Kong Mafia, and the Japanese Yakuza. So those are just some of the things, some of the ones that you probably know already that have been floating around for the past century, decade, further back than what we're dealing with now. Now, there's plenty of other organizations that run similar to what you would think as organized. So, like states, churches, militaries, police forces, and corporations. They may sometimes use the organized crime methods to conduct their activities. I know a lot of people probably think that's weird to say, but it is true. They run kind of just like that, which is where organized crime kind of is going. Running it like a business that you would see like as a corporation or something like that. Like people use that method to get, like I said, their activities done. Well, these might be legal activities, obviously, but it is also very, very similar. I thought that was an important point to point out because it is true. But they use their powers to more or less derive from their status that they were formerly at. So it's all about status and power. Basically, I think that's mostly in the legal world and the underworld is, that's just what it is. But anyway, moving on along here in our organized crime. So sometimes we have the tendency to try to distinguish traditional organized crime, which is often gang-like or more working class in nature, which involves, secret subcultures like we were talking about before, but they can be formed from ethnic, regional, territorial, or cultural identities. And we want to try to distinguish those from some other forms of crime that usually may involve organized or group criminal acts. So when we say that, we're talking about the white-collar crimes, financial crimes, political crimes, war crimes, state crimes, and maybe even treason. You can try to make those distinctions, like I said, between something that we would think of as traditionally called organized crime. But sometimes the distinction between those two is not always apparent, and it continues to be a matter of debate even to this day, because sometimes these other crimes, white-collar crimes, especially financial crimes, people do work together in an organized way with some of those things. So some of it could be possibly considered organized crime, but like I said, that's a fight that is still going on today between agencies and sociologists and psychologists and whoever else investigates it. Even you out there that are listening to this right now, I'm pretty sure if you are a true crime buff like myself, you probably have debated this very same thing right here. And the debate is, like, for example, say in failed states, they can no longer perform basic functions such as education, security, or governance. It's usually due to some kind of violence or to extreme poverty. So organized crime, governance, and war sometimes complement each other. They go together. So the term oligarchy has been used to describe democratic countries whose political, social, and economic institutions come under the control of a few different type of families or business oligarchies, as they may be deemed, come from sometimes organized crime groups in practice. So I'm sure, like I said, if you are into true crime or you are into conspiracy theories, pretty sure you have heard about the families that, say, run the United States of America. So that's what that's talking about right there. And they're saying that has adopted into a organized crime group in practice. So you see what I'm saying? So therefore, you're trying to distinguish: are they or can you consider them to be organized crime? Are they committing criminal acts? If they're, families and the oligarchies are running, for instance, like I said, for instance, countries and stuff like that. So is that organized crime or is that not? As defined by what we just talked about. So that is, like I said, that is the debate right there. That is the debate right there. So moving right along here. So in the United States, the Organized Crime Control Act of 1970, it defines organized crime as the unlawful activities of a highly organized but also disciplined association. Right? So some criminal activities that are structured around that, you would refer to those as racketeering. So many of you, I'm pretty sure you know what that word means, racketeering, because then you're going to start talking about the RICO Act and things like that. Which, and when I was doing research for this podcast, I really had to think about how I wanted to do it, and this is why I'm doing it this way first, so we know. Like when we move into the cases and we start using terms and dates and crime acts and laws and so on and so forth, I want you guys to understand what I'm talking about. And also, like if you're watching the news or if you're talking to your best friend or whatever the case may be, I want you to know exactly what you're talking about when you are speaking about really any subject, which is why we do a lot of teaching here on Society Complex, so we can learn to think for ourselves with the facts that are out there for us to use. So back to this racketeering, and we're just talking about the Organized Crime Control Act of 1970. So historically, the largest organized crime force in the United States has been the Cosa Nostra Mafia. So that is an Italian American mafia. But there have been other transitional criminal organizations that have also risen in the recent decades. So in 2012, the U.S. Department of Justice, in a journal, they stated, since the end of the Cold War, organized crime groups from Russia, China, Nigeria, Italy, and Japan have increased their international presence in worldwide networks, or have become involved in more transnational crime activities. Most of the world's major international organized crime groups are present in the United States. So that's what they said about the rise, or the rising, I suppose, of criminal organizations or organized crime. And the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration's 2017 National Drug Threat Assessment, they did classify Mexican transnational crime organizations, which you'll hear this term or acronym later on, is TCOs. So those are transnational crime organizations. And then as they became the greatest criminal drug threat to the United States. They're citing their dominance over larger regions in Mexico, which they use for cultivation, production, importation, transportation of illicit drugs. So that is what they have deemed that those are a bigger threat to the United States. They said this in 2017. So you're talking about Sinaloa, Los Zetos, things like that, drug trafficking cartels. And they're about, I think it's about 6 that they deem as the greatest influence in drug trafficking to the United States. So those are only a few. Like I said, the Sinaloa cartel, Los Zetos, Beltran Lava. I think it's one, what is it? Jalisco, New Generation, I believe it is, and Juarez and Gulf. Those are the 6 that they deem as the greatest influence of drug trafficking to the United States. So the United Nations Substantial Development Goal 16 It had a target to combat all forms of organized crime as part of the 2030 agenda. So that is the fight that they are fighting to this day, actually. So they're just really, really trying to crack down on the organized crime, especially like, so we're talking, so again, I just want to make sure we understand here, organized crime, it can be transnational, national, local, stuff like that. So transnational obviously means that it is from one country to another, just so people are clear on that. National, that would mean in your own country in one place, things like that. Okay, so we just want to make sure that everybody understands those things. So some of the next things that we're going to talk about here on this episode is we're going to talk about the models of organized crime. We're going to get into a little bit of criminal psychology as it has to relate to organized crime. We're going to talk about drug trafficking, cyber crimes, white collar crimes, and corruption. And those are things, like I said, those are also things that have a lot to do with organized crime. Because when we get to talking about the RICO Act, which we will do on this episode, just so some of you guys may not know what RICO actually stands for, that is Racketeer, Influence, and Corrupt Organizations Act. Okay? And then TOC, I already told you this, but I'll tell it to you one more time, Transnational Organized Crime. Okay? And there's many levels of that. So in the government, as far as the FBI is concerned, they have the African TOC, Asian TOC, Middle Eastern TOC, things like that. So this is to combat transnational organized crime. So a lot of things that fall under the RICO Act, you have federal and you have state. So some of the federal ones, we go bribery, sports bribery, mail fraud, wire fraud, money laundering, obstruction of justice, murder for hire, like I said, drug trafficking, alien smuggling. And then when you go down to the state level of the RICO, you go murder, kidnapping, arson, gambling, bribery still in there, extortion, some drug activity. Okay, so those are some of the things, like I said, that we're going to talk about on this episode. But give me just a few minutes and we will be right back. So make sure you join us after the break so we can continue talking about organized crime. And we are back. Thank you so much for staying tuned. Okay, so my next story here, it is having to do with Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. Now, they just resolved a lawsuit that was filed against an employer. Now, the lawsuit has accused an employer was accused of responding to an employee's 2 positive drug tests in a way that violated the Americans with Disability Act, so that is ADA. So the EEOC sued Lonza America LLC. They operate as a pharmaceutical and medicine manufacturing plant out of Tennessee. The lawsuit says that Lonza illegally fired a 14-year employee after he twice tested positive for a legally controlled substance. So the guy was in recovery. So after the tests were conducted, Lonza learned that the employee was a recovering opiate addict who was participating in a treatment program. So he was getting help. And he had he did in fact have a legal prescription for a opiate medication. So he legally had that. So the EEOC alleged that Lonza inappropriately forced the employee to begin counseling with a clinical psychologist. It also stated that the company would not let him return to work unless he stopped taking the legally now prescribed medication. That's a no-no. Can't do that. That's something that's legally prescribed and he can take it. So yeah, I'm sure you see where this is going. So that the alleged conduct violated the ADA. So the agency said that's what they said in the lawsuit against Lonza. So this resulted in a 6-figure payout. To end the suit, Lonzo has agreed to pay the employee $150,000. Also, in addition to that, it will provide ADA-related training. Right. So anyway, a note to employers: the ADA does not protect those who are currently and illegally using drugs. This only applies to people that are legally using drugs, but it does protect recovering addicts who are no longer using drugs illegally. So it's a crazy story, right? He he basically got paid for doing drugs, but they are legal drugs, obviously, because he's a recovering addict. Like I said, they had to pay him $150,000. So even after he failed 2 drug tests, but he was taking the drugs legally. So yeah, there's nothing you can really do about that. Just saying. Just saying. So watch out, employers. Watch out. So going back to North Carolina. Now this story, I'm just gonna tell it to you, and then you can let me know what you think. They're on Twitter at Society Complex 1, TikTok at Society Complex 1. Also find me on Facebook at Society Complex. Instagram, you can also find me Society_Complex. So a deputy's wife in North Carolina nailed windows shut and denied children food. So a man, he was working for the sheriff as a sheriff deputy when he and his wife denied 4 children access to food and water. This is according to North Carolina officials. Now, this is Asheville area couple also nailed the windows shut, locked doors, and they wouldn't let their kids as young as the age of 2 go to the bathroom. The North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation said in their warrant. So this is what was said in the warrants. The names are Matthew Anders Lund, 36 years old, and Amy Nicole Lund, 39 years of age. They are facing multiple counts of child abuse in connection to these accusations that stem from June. And this is according to court documents. Lund is now out of a job, obviously, at the county sheriff's office. The department said as of July 23rd in their news release. The investigators did not list any attorney information for them, and Facebook user believed to be Amy Lund didn't immediately respond to McClatchy News request for a comment on the Wednesday. Now, in addition to the child abuse charges, this couple is also accused of leaving the children in the home and depriving them of food, water, bathroom, and whereby the juvenile could be adjudicated abuse and neglected. The kids range from ages 2 to 13 years old, according to court documents. State officials and Buncombe County Sheriff's Office and District Attorney reached out on July 22nd with a request to investigate the case. So later on that day, Sheriff Quentin Miller in a news release said Matthew Lund's termination was effective immediately. And he said that he had been on the force since about 2013, according to his personnel file. But before that, he was fired from the nearby Hendersonville Police Department in 2012 after he had a confrontation which was officer related, but it was not a non-fatal shooting. So it sounds like this guy already had some problems as a police officer. So this is probably for the best, obviously, clearly. So anyway, the state continues to investigate him and his wife. They're, facing multiple charges of child abuse, delinquency of minors, and so on goes the list, obviously. According to more court documents, the list of the Lunds as the children's parents, and Amy Lund posted about foster care on social media, according to the Citizens Times. Wow. Arrest records don't list the couple as husband and wife. The two have been married since 2018, according to the newspaper. Officials said that the pair is about 10 miles roughly outside of Asheville, North Carolina. So, look, they know better than that. And you're a sheriff too, sir. You're a sheriff. You definitely knew better than that. I don't care if you were involved or not. You're saying that your wife is just doing it. Sir. You're involved too. So do not even try that. Do not try that, sir. Okay? So I hope, they get this case resolved. I'm definitely going to be keeping up with this one as well. I'm going to let you know what goes on here in Asheville. And we are certainly going to keep our eye on this case, because you know what you did is wrong. You denied 4 children access to food, water, and a bathroom. And then you want to lock windows and doors. Now you know you. Y'all know y'all not right. And I said that he's part of the law enforcement community. Now you know you're not right, sir. Okay? You know you're not right. You need to get yourself together, and hopefully some time in jail might do it for you. Okay? The now 78-year-old New York real estate heir Robert Durst took the stand at his California murder trial on Monday and immediately denied killing his best friend, Susan Berman. His attorney, Dick, asked him while he was on the stand, did he kill Susan Berman? He responded, no. And then he was asked, did you know who did? And he also responded, no. Now, Durst is now in very, very frail condition. He has bladder cancer and several other ailments that prevented him when he was on trial he couldn't really hear the judge. He couldn't really hear his attorneys that well, which caused him to keep talking, even when, they told him not to, et cetera, et cetera. So, I don't know if you guys know a lot about this case, but like I said, he's accused of killing his best friend, Susan Berman. Now, he and his lawyers claim that when he showed up at the house, she was already dead. He panicked when he saw the body, and then he fled. Now, he did an interview in 2015 with the Jinx, and he apparently made some seemingly damning statements about the killing. So, which resulted in him, the eve of the last episode of that, being arrested after that final episode had aired. He finally was, started his trial 2020, but the coronavirus obviously paused that, so it resumed back in May. And so he's accused of killing her. He's accusing of shooting her in her home in December of 2000. Now, according to him, like I said, he did not do it, and he's hoping to be acquitted, but I don't know. I mean, it's a hard one. I don't know. I mean, what do you guys think? Do you think he killed her or not? Let me know. You can find me on TikTok at Society Complex 1. You can find me on Twitter at Society Complex, and you can find me on Facebook at Society Complex, and you can also find me on Instagram at Society_Complex. So like I said, he's very, very sick, so he was unable to stand, and he can't wear a suit or anything, so he was in the brown jumpsuit, that they give you in jail. The judge had denied several requests for delays and a motion for a mistrial because of his health woes. So he is currently sitting in a wheelchair, and like I said, he struggles to hear anything and anybody pretty much. A lot of people say he's faking it, but I mean, he looks pretty frail to me if you've ever seen him. So I don't know. I mean, I don't think he's faking that. I'm pretty sure he's very, 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 a very sick man. But the trial began, at Los Angeles Supreme Court more than about a year ago. His lawyer went through a risky move of calling a murder defendant to testify. A lot of people don't do that. Just like when he was acquitted in 2003 at a Texas murder trial, when the wealthy heir, he, like I said, he was acquitted. So I guess he thought that this same thing was going to happen. But like I said, it might. You never know. He got out of the first one, so he might get out of this one. I don't know. I guess we're gonna see. I don't know, but we will see. I'm definitely going to keep keeping up with this trial. This is one of like my favorite true crime things. Just especially being that he was acquitted the first time. But this time, I don't know if he's gonna get out of it. I mean, he could, go to jail like Bill Cosby, even though Bill Cosby got out on a technicality. But, whatever. Guess we'll see how this goes. Thank you for staying tuned into Society Complex with your host, Vaughn Lee. And I'll see you next time with breaking news headlines. I'm out.